right, so it's Todd Atkins, and I'm back with Miguel Adorati, and we're going to do a New Year's Eve episode, um, and we're going to cover the topic of One FC. There's been an interesting article that was written about, the possibility of them going out of business in 2024, and we're going to talk a little bit about referencing that article, and so always before we start, I'm going to talk a little bit about Live to Fight Design. They make fight banners and gym banners. And if you use my promo code Todd Atkins, you can get $20 off of one. We also have a new sponsor, Bet Stamp, which I'll be reading some information on them later on this episode. And Miguel, we reference this article, and I want to make sure we give this guy credit. So I'm just going to bring up
excellent work by this guy. Excellent, and a labor of love, because it's not like he's going to break the internet with a million reads. So he put a lot of work into something that was well researched and stuff that not a lot of people are going to see or pay attention to, but it's worthy of it. So that's why we're here.
I'm trying to find his last name, but the article's called "The Tragedy of One's Hubris." His first name was William, but I'm trying to find his last name. But try to find it later so I can make sure to credit him for the actual article, because it just says William here. But I'll try to make sure I get his actual. I think I can actually get it here. Let's see.
Hold on, I got. Let's see if it's on here. It does say just William on the credit on the website. So, yeah, I don't have much more information for you there. He's a Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu black belt writing about MMA, health, fitness, and how technology impacts them. And but it does just come up as William on X as well. So
yeah, I'll get it.
So yeah, he's trying to be anonymous or cute, but it's a well written article. Yeah. Very few things in this sport get written that well. So hats off to Willie.
Right, and it's called "The Tragedy of One's Hubris." So if you guys want to read it, you just kind of type that into Google and you'll find it. And Miguel, I kind of wanted to give you a chance to kind of give your opening thoughts on what you thought of this article.
Hold on one second here. Yeah, like I said, it's a well written and well researched article on a non-subject, really. One has not impacted the American market since they started. Zero impact. They did one show here that was supposed to be one of a couple of shows, and they just did one. They're distributed on Amazon, I believe, which is marginal. They've signed some good athletes. They come at you with a mixed bag of MMA, Muay Thai with gloves, MMA gloves, and then grappling as well. And I think there are reasons for that. The first and foremost, if you compare him to UFC, you're talking about a non-starter. The UFC is a lot closer to, if one is the biggest in the Asian market, the UFC is a lot closer at number 2 to one in the Asian markets than one is to the UFC in the American market. So they've always had questionable finances. I think you're talking about, they operate in countries where the laws against, monopolies and things like that are a lot less transparent than the United States. So it doesn't surprise me that, if their contracts turn out to be even more restrictive than the UFC's, I think that could be one of the reasons that they've had a limited presence in the United States and haven't been able to make an impact there, is that their contracts are probably worse than the UFC's. When they did a show here, they didn't sweep in and try to change the landscape or do anything like, I'm not even saying overpay, but just, pay the main event guys main event money. And they didn't do that. They stuck with what their current pay scales are, and their contracts, they're offering American fighters with undefeated records, 6-7 fight deals with, increases of $1,000 per fight, starting in the 4 figures, 8,000, 9,000, 10,000, that sort of stuff. So yeah, if they go away, they were never a factor. So what are we really talking about? They've gotten some good athletes. They've they try to get a situation where, with the grappling, they've signed elite grapplers. So they kind of get away with this, like that they understand, the sport and grappling and things like that better than the UFC does, and they don't. They've signed the elite guys, and the idea there would have been to, eventually transition them into MMA. But when you look at the one roster, I doubt that the one roster is even 1/5 as big as the UFC's roster. So it's a they never made an impact in MMA really. They took an area where there was a void, and I'm talking about Asia outside of Japan. You're talking about, if you include China, which they have some Chinese athletes on the roster, UFC does too, and stuff like that. But you're talking about they've actually had Indian athletes and things like that. You're talking about they have access to most of the world's population for an audience. So yeah, they've been able to operate at a high level for a certain amount of time. Again, those countries, their laws in terms of, monopolies and things like that, who knows what, they're actually able to do. But I present to you that it's probably more restrictive than the UFC, and that's probably one of those situations where, we recently did an interview with John Peretti, and I think one of the things that Peretti, as a as he's known as a hard ass and stuff like that, but Peretti would make sure that the fighters are making more money than the promoters, or making, equal money, as that the promoters aren't the ones that are walking around, flying to Cabo San Lucas for New Year's and beating their wives on television and making the news and stuff like that. This is not, and probably with one, you're probably looking at Chowdhury being the biggest star of that company. And, those things are all broken. So yeah, it's a great article because he's looking at something that's kind of a company that's an anomaly.
Right, but I wanted to ask you because you were part of a startup that was signing a lot of big names and spent a lot of money. Now it went out for probably different reasons, I would say, than what they're talking about with one. But maybe kind of talk about, as someone who's involved in something that went away, kind of where you think one's problems might lie, or if they went away, why it happened, why it would happen.
Well, I'm not totally certain that they'll go away. But I think what will happen is that their incursion into the American market will stop. They've been sort of flirting with the American market and looking for, picking and choosing here and there an athlete or two from the American rosters and things like that to take over there. But, it's never been to compete with the UFC. They can't. They're not going to come over here and take on the UFC. That's a dream. But that they could still, they could shrink a little and continue to operate in Asia and keep doing, Muay Thai shows and the types of things that they're doing there. I'm not 100% certain that they just go away. But like I said, what I think what you're actually really talking about here is that the idea that they're going to compete with the UFC on a world level is a joke. That's not going to happen.
But I mean, the way people are talking is they're saying they're going to run out of money in 2024. So that sounds like they would go away.
Yeah, if they run out of money, like I said, if they shrink and operate on a smaller level, they might be able to save the day, kind of thing, keep the brand going. I'm not sure that's that means that they're going to stop and stuff like that. But I think the idea of them growing in the American market and becoming a player versus the UFC, that's never going to happen.
Now, when they were raising a lot of money, like in Qatar and things like that, and obviously raising more money than they made, or losing more money basically than they made. Um, kind of from your experience, kind of tell me how that works as far as.
Well, there were some signs. I spoke to some of their executives at one point, and they were actually trying to diversify into making, action movies and that sort of stuff, kind of like almost like a WWE style kind of thing, but using their stars to be in motion pictures. And that would look to be like the kind of thing that, oh, that's crossover big time stuff and they're going to make a fortune and stuff like that. But yeah, if you don't make your money back on movies will churn your money out. You know what I mean? With Bodog, I would present to you that, they say that there was like $50 million lost or something along those lines in the Bodog world. I absolutely assure you that most of that money was lost on what was called Bodog Music, which was a brother under Bodog Entertainment to the Bodog fight. So the music was another entity where it's like all of a sudden, you're playing in worlds where if you're a fight company, you're not an expert at. And that comes with money. They were playing with money. They were trying to bring their money back and stuff like that. And I don't know what amounted to that. I haven't seen Matt Hume in a movie yet. You know what I mean? But those things were talked about. Um, so yeah, I think that they've always been looking to expand and diversify and bring in big time money. And where their failures are, I don't know. I do know that they had an athlete from Burma, Myanmar. I'm not sure of his name right off the top of my head, but even with Rotang and Thailand, when you've got a guy of that nature, I know in Myanmar that they had, when this guy they put him in the ring, the entire country stopped and watched it, similar to Manny Pacquiao effects in the Philippines. And Myanmar is not a small population. It's not 5 million people like Costa Rica, say, or something like that. It's bigger than that. And so, I assure you that fighter is not a millionaire. I assure you that fighter was making, for the amount of eyes that he was attracting for them, most of that money went to the company and not to him. And that's kind of what one of the things that John Peretti would speak about as being wrong there. The guy would be deserving of star power money, not hey, here's enough money you can buy a house in Myanmar. What do you need for that? 30, 40K?
Right.
So yeah, Bob Mazy told us that one of the things the UFC does, and we may have seen it rear its head again this week, was, they tell Aljamain Sterling that Sean O'Malley is this huge pay-per-view star, and they could actually tell him, look, here's a couple of $1 million, $2 million, and we'll keep the pay-per-view share, but you get the 2 million up front. That's because they were going to make a lot more than that. So there are semantics and there are ways that the companies look. Chowdhury, like you said, the guy, the one guy is a Harvard graduate, a hedge fund guy. I'm not sure this winds up with him living with his mom in the basement anymore. You know what I mean? He's going to walk away rich still. So if it goes down or not, it is irrelevant to the upper level management of those guys.
Yeah, and I know Hume was like kind of like maybe like the second to him. Am I understand that right?
I think with Hume they got a guy that managed talent relations for them and understands the sport at an ultra high level. I'm not sure he's actually number two over there. I think Hume probably answers to more executives, and Hume has a team of people that are considered matchmakers under him. So he's more of like the VP, like a Dana kind, sort of, rather than a Joe Silva. And he's got a couple of Joe Silvas that work under him. Um, I'm sure Matt's not going to walk away poor from the one, excursion. But when he signed his contract and they paid him whatever he got paid, and I'm sure he was paid well. Um, they needed him in his presence and his ability to guide the the fight direction kind of thing. I think what you see there is that Matt was probably forced to do a lot of compromising and to operate, the way, like I believe, how many shows have I done? Probably more than 100 shows in MMA. And how many times were we like, all right, I'm losing matches. Let me throw a grappling match in there. Let me throw an MMA. So I present to you that one's diversification of rule sets is just a way to keep things cheap and also a way to not invest fully in a 600 or 700 man roster the way the UFC has. So their operating costs in those countries, especially, is very much smaller than what the UFC is.
Now, I wanted to ask you about like we're talking about like Hume. For me, I know we were talking about neither one of these guys are going to walk away poor, but I think in Hume's case, we talked about this before. There's some guys who maybe they deserve to make some money off of MMA. They've been around MMA for so long and they haven't got anything out of it, and in a way, I kind of feel good for him because he's one of those
Me too.
guys who's been around from the very beginning and,
Yeah, yeah, and I
doesn't
think
have the notoriety that he probably deserves.
I agree with you.
Yeah.
At a certain level, for me, the thought is that transcendental talent is what should make the money, right? And usually that's going to present itself in the ring. And we got Hume old. In the 90s, he was older already and towards the end of his career. But I think that his talent assessment and is also, keep in mind, Hume is the trainer Demetrius Johnson. And if you haven't, if you, you're not aware of who Demetrius Johnson is because he was on the UFC roster, cleaned house at 125 pounds and got traded to one because Hume thought that they would do better money wise over there. I'm sure Hume got his guy paid there, and Demetrius has done. They actually gotten him beaten over there. So they put him through the grind and stuff. And I think that that's all Hume's ability to, understand and see the sport at a higher level. So yeah, I'm not belittling or saying that Hume doesn't deserve to live the rest of his life comfortably making money off of this. But at the same time, maybe Demetrius will also be able to, live the rest of his life comfortably, but maybe not. What did they do? Was he making 30 and 30 with the UFC? And then a bite of the pay-per-view, which at 125 they didn't push him, so there was nothing there. Was he making? Did he make 100,000 for any of his UFC fights? And is that what they took him over to one to make? He made 80 or 75 at the UFC, so they gave him a bump to 100,000 at one, or did they actually cross him over and say, look, here's money that you'll be comfortable with, just manage it right. Don't buy Ferraris, for your ex-girlfriends and piss it away and you'll live the rest of your life comfortably. I present to you that very, very, very few, if one does go down, the number of athletes that'll retire with their one money and live the rest of their lives comfortably will be zero.
Now, I want to ask you something about some of these fighters, at least the ones that crossed over in MMA, that are more in the Asian, market. People like Stamp Fairtex who became extremely popular.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe you could argue might be one of their biggest, maybe their biggest star as a fighter.
Mm-hmm.
Um, do you think someone would go after her like UFC or? You
Yeah,
know,
I
there
think
are
what
fighters there that I think are commodities, but do they disappear or does someone go after them?
I think the UFC would be the only, maybe the PFL. Again, here's the mystery: is we know the UFC carries 500 to 700 fighters on their roster. Every once in a while you'll come, it makes the media rounds that they're cutting 100 guys. That only comes from having a really large roster, and one doesn't operate that way. And one doesn't have that kind of rosters. They may, I don't, it's not fair for me to put a number on it because I'm not sure of it, but I'm sure that it's not a 500 to 700 man roster. So, and it simply because they don't do enough shows to keep everybody busy that way. So they don't have that. So say they have 200 people in their rotation or 150 people in their rotation. Yeah, I think the top 15 or 20 will get work. Maybe with the PFL, there'll be a couple more. If the PFL chooses to, you know, we haven't even heard PFL Asia yet. Maybe, we've heard Africa and stuff like that. But if the PFL were to decide to do something in Asia, they'd find and pick through that roster, they'd find even more mature fighters and level than they will in Africa. That's the one thing. Who's practicing MMA in Africa right now? Not a lot of people. So, the I think you'll see their best guys pop up somewhere. The UFC might take them. The problem with the UFC is you get the Michael Chandler, Eddie Alvarez effect of they'll take a star from another company and put him into the meat grinder directly so as to prove a point that their roster is better and deeper and more powerful. That's what's important to the UFC. So any of those guys that come over that were superstars over there are going to go right into the middle of the roster there and not be treated like a superstar unless they actually earn it with wins. And it's not going to be easy. Chandler couldn't do it. Eddie, Eddie won the belt, but he also, lost fights and eventually left, because of money and stuff like that. So, and Eddie, you have one of maybe the more marketable, likable guys that you could have on a roster. So, now you're going to be talking about, even with Anderson Silva, commonly called the GOAT, in most GOAT conversations, if not all of them. They didn't love him. They didn't love him. They didn't love him because, English was poor, et cetera, et cetera. And that's going to happen across the board with the one roster. So they're not going to be able to bring, they haven't had an English speaker become a superstar over there. You know what I mean? So when they bring them over here, they're just going to be foreigners talking to translators. They're firmly mid-level, even though they're undefeated. And one is very picky about the way they pick out athletes, and you have to be a champion in something, whether it's a smaller show or another like a grappling champion or something like that. They force you to be an elite guy on the talent side, but again, that's not going to matter at the top end of the UFC's roster. What's going to matter is the Twitter followers and things like that. Maybe they have the followers in Asian markets and things like that, but that doesn't translate onto the world market, which is what the UFC is operating on, and that's the cornerstone is, Vegas and the Vegas shows, and then, perhaps at Abu Dhabi and Saudi Arabia are going to mix themselves up in that, and that's going to be business that's done in English. So bringing over Rotang or one of the or Stamp or one of the spectacular fighters from over there doesn't move the needle for the UFC as much. The PFL may grab them, but we're still waiting to see what they do with their top end stars.
I think it could benefit Ryzen, because Ryzen's over there and they can maybe grab some of those fighters.
Yeah, I think Ryzen's a marginal player. I think Japan is a big market, but unless you've gotten a Japanese star that's ready to battle it out and cross over and establish themselves for a 5-year run where they're the biggest thing going, that market isn't going to be attractive. Japan was always big because of Pride, but Pride was something very special. And if you look at it, they were always getting the best fighters across the world because it was a very limited market, but there was always a component of, I mean, at some point, Pride was Sakuraba and, Takada and these big stars, but you always got Akira Shoji. And if there's not, they're nationalists. If there's not a Japanese star that they can pay attention to, then you're looking at a market that will only give you marginal attention. Risen's good. It's a good show, but without the big major Japanese star, they're actually just a regional show. They're no bigger or better than the CFFC in the United States.
Yeah, I think not being able to get Takeru and letting ONE FC get him was a big drop for them.
Yeah, and they let what's this kid that's got? Yeah, no,
Yeah, tension. Yeah.
Again, I know that you're a fan of those guys and that they move the needle over there and stuff like that. But I do think that once you're talking about smaller athletes, you're talking about much less needle moving going on, especially at a worldwide level. And tension is no bigger than my 13-year-old.
No, but what I'm saying is, in Japan, if you were gonna try to bring the Pride energy back up, they needed to sign. They needed to sign those guys, and they didn't.
What they need to do is they need to go out and get the judo heavyweight gold medalist, and sign him and start moving him over, and work on that slowly. Or what they need is that they need someone like an Akibono or someone like that, somebody that is coming over from sumo or some of the other things, but they need a heavyweight. They need a heavyweight, and that's not very easy in Japan. From Yuki Kondo to Kiyoshi Tamura, you had middleweights operating as light heavyweights and heavyweights because they simply cannot fill the roster. And then once you got to the Ogawas and the Takadas and things like that, you really talked about, now you're talking about potential works. And the fact is a drop off in talent because they're big. They're not the stellar athletes that are, like American football players and that sort of stuff. So, certain amount of what Japan needs is some type of creation. And they don't have it right now.
Now I'm going to talk a little bit about BetStamp, and then I want to get into some of the stuff of Mike Kogan that I know you want to talk about here. So I'm going to bring up some information about BetStamp that they've done for me. And sports betting has rapidly risen in popularity, and I want to connect you with an opportunity to get started or get ahead. Having multiple sportbooks accounts is the most simple way to maximize your profits. And there's never been a better time to sign up. When you visit my page at signupexpert.com/TAS, like Todd Atkins Show, TAS, you'll be connected to all the sports books in your region, along with a review of each platform and its unique benefits. Like at the top of the page, you can scroll and find your region or your state. And all these sports books have valuable sign-up offers for new users. When you register through my link, you'll automatically receive the top offer at each one. When you use multiple sports books, you ensure that you can always access the best available odds, which is key to successful sports betting. If you want to take advantage of these benefits and support our brand, please consider signing up for your next sports book at signupexpert.com/TAS. And that's from our new sponsor, BetStamp, who is supporting grassroots content creators in MMA. So we appreciate them, supporting us.
That's what they say there is absolutely true. Look, if you have one account and you're loyal to one sports book, you might be like, okay, wow, this fight, I'm getting 2-1 odds on this one. You could go down the block here and find it at 2.5-1 and make more money, 3-1. Choose where your bet's going to be if you're sure about it. Is absolutely the way to go. And I'm not a gambler. In terms of I believe as a matchmaker that it would be a conflict of interest for me to be even delving into gambling or anything like that. But I've been around gamblers, and I can tell you that they all operate that way, like the real guys that make the money and stuff. So what they're telling you there is a little bit of inside news if you're just an amateur gambler kind of thing that make you step your game up.
Right. Miguel definitely has a background as he used to do a gambling show on UFC Fight Pass with Nick Kalikas, was it?
Yeah,
Yeah. So,
yeah,
Miguel, we should probably do a gambling show around our sponsor here and kind of get a little bit more into the website so y'all can see that.
for sure, for
Yeah.
sure. And it's funny. I've got a good record of picking fights overall. Just winners and losers and stuff like that. And the one time I put money back in, I think it was 2000, 2001, somewhere along those lines. I had just run the Abu Dhabi show in Abu Dhabi. It may have been the last one, so 2001. And two guys came out of that show with spectacular performances that were going to the UFC. One was Matt Serra and one was Ricardo Almeida. How can you go wrong betting on those guys? Well, Matt Serra caught a spinning back fist from Shoney Carter, and I believe Almeida got finished fast by one of the Russian fighters in one of his earlier outings. So that was the end of my gambling run because once money becomes involved, you're maybe not. For me, it's more about the purity and stuff. But there's money to be made out there if you're picking it. And I present to you that that's actually what has made the sport big, and that's what the Fertitas entry into the sport allowed. Was now you've got gambling people that are coming in, so the money is exponential. And like I said, at some point Dana and the Fertitas, somebody's playing house for multi-million-dollar bets on a world level, and so it makes the sport big. It makes it watched at a higher level, and BetStamp is bringing it to the masses, and I think that's a next level thing.
Now, I wanted to get into this Mike Kogan kind of comments along the lines of this ONE FC discussion. And Mike Kogan was, high up with Bellator, the second era Bellator, not Bjorn Rebney, but Scott Coker. I think he was like the number 2 to Scott Coker. And he was on the Ariel Helwani show, and he was kind of, at the time, I don't know if PFL picked him up or not. I'd have to go look, but he was waiting to be interviewed by the PFL basically because, they were part of this crossover PFL to acquire Bellator. Yeah, one thing he had said that I had talked to Miguel offline about was, if you don't go to PFL with one kind of in the situation they're in, as someone of his level, where it's his job, MMA is his job, his only job, there's nowhere else to go. So Miguel had some interesting thoughts about this, and I wanted to give him a chance to kind of voice those thoughts.
Yeah, I mean, the fact is if he was making a check for the last 10 years on MMA from Bellator, then he has to count himself as extremely fortunate. And he has to count himself as a person that, should have been preparing for that to go away at some point for a long time. Because it's never been, crossover marginal, like they're going to be, they're getting close to the UFC. No, the UFC's been expanding their lead over them. And now with a merger with the PFL, any merger now, I'll give you the example I gave Todd offline. The PFL has a person in the office that buys all the plane tickets for the show. So, all right, who's your corner man? How do you spell his name? where are you flying out of? Okay, the contract comes in. Okay, this guy gets a second plane ticket. So who's the second person? You know, the fighter in 2 plane tickets, the fighter in 1 plane ticket. The name spelling. Again, I'll go back to my Abu Dhabi experiences, and people may remember Marcio Cruz, heavyweight Brazilian black belt that fought in the UFC and had a good run at some point. The first time he showed up in Abu Dhabi, they bought his plane ticket for Marcio Pedipano. They bought it under his middle name because of this type of screw up. So every company's got a guy that, or a woman or a man, a person that buys the plane ticket. So now the PFL has 2 of these, the Bellator one and this one. There's redundancy in any merger. So jobs are going to go away across the board. Mike, Kogan, yeah. Personally, I feel for you. Like, it does suck when you're going to have to go through a big change like that. But yeah, you're in a limited market. Most of the smaller companies in the UFC, I'm sorry, in the United States, are going to be, the UFC's already bought them and sold them because most of them, went through this jockeying for position of getting your show to the level where, all right, give me, I need a sponsor to help me with the lighting so that I can do lighting into a presentable level for television. Because you don't see these dark little shows in the PF on the Fight Pass. Now you're seeing pretty good shows at Talon and the Cage Fury Fighting Championships and stuff. These are highly produced shows. So yeah, so the UFC is going to rule him out. And I'm not saying those guys all have their infrastructure. If he's not on camera talent, then he's got less of a chance of sticking. Because why would Don Davis in the PFL? Unless Mike Hogan, God bless him. I can't really speak on a personal level. I don't know him, but he hasn't exactly in the last 10 years with Bellator separated himself as like this crossover, like a Hunter Campbell, like where like we know his name now all of a sudden, and they can't do business without him or something like that. So without doing that, why would Don Davis replace the people he already has in that position with him? That's a very real, very open question with any merger. Like I said, this comes down to the office people. So yeah, there are going to be jobs that go away, and there are going to be people that wind up outside of MMA working, for a living, and Mike Hogan may very well be one of them. Hey, I'm one of them.
Right, and maybe you could tell people about that because for people that may not know your background with Bodog, kind of, you went through that experience.
Yeah, I mean, with Bodog, I believe Bodog, is marginalized now. I've seen lists of top 10, all-time big MMA shows and things like that, and Bodog is almost forgotten. And it was a short run of 18 months. But I do think that we were probably the first company that the UFC said, we got to take these guys out. Because if they keep doing what they're doing, they could be a threat. And maybe that's my arrogance and stuff like that. But I believe I've gotten our roster up into the almost 100 fighters. Of those fighters, in public, I think we've heard George Masvidal, Chael Sonnen, Cain Velasquez, Eddie Alvarez. There's just 4, and there are more. Those guys got their first big contract break with me. So I think that they were also a little bit worried on the talent end, and they had to take us out. And I think we were the first ones that were sort of playing the innocent game of like, yeah, we do our shows and you do your shows and stuff like that. And they were out to kill. And that was the end of it. So Bodog gets forgotten, but I think that we were the first one that, like I said, I gave those stars their first contracts that kept them in MMA. They'll all tell you that. They can't fight for $2,000 every, for a prolonged period of time. And these were different contracts. And you know, if you can't bring the money in, then at some point, business is going to have to change and things like that. People don't like to lose money. So that's what goes on with a lot of the companies, is that the UFC has locked down the market so much, and they have so many income streams that that they control and things like that. That they're able to shut down the competition. Bellator had a big fund behind them, and so you still get fighters on the Bellator roster that say Bellator pays better than the UFC. Ryan Bader might tell you that he's made more money with Bellator than the UFC. Corey Anderson, I think, is the public one in the last month or so that came out and said that they pay better in the UFC. But I think that those are just examples, just small examples. I don't think that's across the board. They wouldn't be able to do that, and they don't have a 500 to 700 man roster. And again, you get a mishmash of, like, the UFC's locked everything down. They saw that the fight gear where the t-shirt and short companies were making money, so they did everything they could to shut that down and absorb that money for themselves. And there are a lot of other examples there. So I think unless you're prepared to play the game at every level here, that companies are going to be marginalized. And I think Bellator was something that, because of Jordan Rebney's work, got themselves to a position where they were kind of a number two. And they rode that coattail for a long time. But the situation there is Scott Coker really did nothing to improve that product. Zero. Putting on Ken Shamrock versus Hoist Gracie when they were both in their 50s is, borderline criminal.
Yeah, that was frustrating for me as someone who watched the original product, to see it just not really be improved on. It was really frustrating.
Yeah. And again, this is where they got it wrong. And with Bodog, I present to you, I had it right, because I was trying to escalate the number of shows that we could do. And again, with Viacom and Bellator, they were always married to a TV schedule. So they would be like, well, we're doing, 3 shows in 3 weeks, and then we won't do another show for 2 months because we don't have a spot on the television channel. You can't do that. The UFC went, they had their pay-per-views. It's like, well, okay, so now we're going to do non-pay-per-view shows, the fight nights. And they start out smaller and things like that. But all of a sudden, they had to get a TV channel to put it on, and it starts in Spike, and then they went from Spike to Fox, which was a big jump, because they didn't need to be on Channel 5 in New York. Fox had gotten to be such a big entity that there was Fox Sports and Fox's other channels and other outlets and things. So they were on different channels for different shows, but they were putting their product out there. And when Fox wasn't enough, they went to another channel and got themselves on those shows,
I think they were on Fuel TV for a while. And
yeah, exactly. Yeah. But that's the point is to execute the contract with your original contracts, where you're not exclusive to a channel. Viacom wasn't going to produce Bellator for Fuel TV or any of those things, so just that elegant move by the UFC of showing their shows wherever they could, until they became the commodity that now is on ESPN and ESPN2, ESPN3. They're going to be on TV no matter what every week now. And that's the thing is like, the shows that Bellator was doing was, they have one channel. As far as I can tell with the PFL, they have one channel. And if the TVs are doing their job, they're probably saying, hey, PFL, you're exclusive to us, man. Which means they're dead already. Because you can't go through this. Thanksgiving saw the end of the PFL season. and they gave away their $1 million. It's Thanksgiving. It's more than a month ago. We haven't seen anything there. They did their Europe show, and then Europe died also. Now, when is this PFL? Last time we were together, you went out to the website. Doesn't even say we're back in January. We're back in February. We're going to go huge in March. We're going to take a few months off, but March, we're coming out of the shoot fast. It doesn't even appear that they have a plan. And that's not what the UFC was about. Like I said, I always point back to this, that seminal moment of Forrest and Bonner. And the very next week, you had Couture and Liddell. That's what you need to go to, because and here's the thing is and you need to be prepared for Couture to get injured. In other words, it's not like, we lost we'll cancel the show. No. Do it. Do something. And do whatever it is without that main event, but do the show, and then the following week you follow it up again, and the following week you follow it up again, and people will forget all the mess that happened there. And there's nobody else that is showing me that they understand that, and that's where they're heading for, including one, which is the reason for this podcast, right? As big as their distribution is and one is dealing with, in the United States, you got the American market. Okay, so boom, big, right? But I think one is dealing with, a lot of, they got a deal in Thailand, they got a deal in Singapore, they got a deal in Myanmar, they got a deal here, they got a deal there in the Philippines. There's still a lot of Filipino athletes, even if they haven't done a show in the Philippines in a while. So they're on TV there. It's 100 million people live in the Philippines, but again, that's a lot of logistics to line up TV deals in separate countries and things like that and stuff. So they're dealing with a multi-headed monster, but I think that they're content with, it's like, all right, we got a show coming up with, 4 or 5 of the Filipino stars that we've developed. So we got to put that show on primetime in the Philippines, and that's the way their deal works. But is the show that they're doing in Thailand the following week, that's a little smaller, is that also going to be on the Filipino show the following weekend, and then the following weekend, and then the following weekend? I think they take time off. In the United States market, they did one show, and they're on, they did a push where they were trying to be like, we're on Amazon and things like that. Go check us out and things. But it was a lukewarm push. And that's the thing where that's the point where the UFC differentiates itself, is nothing stops that machine. And one stops themselves. They announced, I don't even know if they announced it. Maybe as an insider, I knew. But there were supposed to be 2 shows in 2024 on the United States. And they did one. No, you should. And here's the other part. The UFC understands this. They had to grab a John Jones show that was falling apart and move it from Vegas and to California, but they did it. Bob Meyerowitz understood that. They flew everybody from New York to Dothan, Alabama. And that wasn't by chance. They had the venue, they had everything, they had a backup plan. One canceled a show or never delivered a show that they said they were going to deliver. That's nothing, and not to be vulgar, nothing short of 9/11. You should cancel a show. It's that simple. When was the last time you ever had an NFL game canceled? Maybe in New Orleans with the catastrophes of the
Hurricane.
Of the hurricanes and things like that. But and I'm not talking off fresh memory, but probably those were played in Dallas or in a local. They moved them. They didn't cancel.
Nope.
The Saints didn't go 15. Didn't have a 15-game season that season. Never cancel an event. It's murder for your event. It's demeaning. The people will see that. So yeah, and every company does that. They all will kowtow to, like, well, we don't have TV, so we won't do a show or this, that, or the other stuff. The UFC doesn't care. UFC built a building in Vegas, and I'm sure that they'll tape something and put it on TV somewhere, even if it's not. They're not even at the point. They have such a market now that anything they put on, somebody will air it for them. But even if they weren't at that, I believe that they understand that weekly, having a calendar that's untouchable is the number one thing that makes you a fight company.
Now, before we sign off, there's one thing I wanted to ask about. Conor McGregor made this announcement on Twitter. I don't know if you saw it, that he's going to fight Michael Chandler during International Fight Week. So not UFC 300. Going to be on June 29th, and he said they were going to fight at 185. So, one, do you believe it? That weight and the date. Do you believe that?
Why would Michael Chandler jump up 2 or 3 weight classes?
Well, he said he would do it. I mean, he said he'd fight him at any weight. So
I wonder what he walks around at, because Chandler looks to me like a short, stocky guy. Like 185 is he doesn't appeal to me. I don't think Adesanya is worried about it. I don't even think Kelvin Gastelum would be worried about it. Michael Chandler's entry into the 185. We got another guy who's a champion, and McGregor. With McGregor, you gotta actually take it with a grain of salt. He's talking about fighting in 6 months from now, and anything could happen. Anything could happen at that point, So yeah, we'll see. He needed to be in the ring last June. And I think that's kind of was the plan, right? Except for he decided to do steroids, and the company decided to throw out their whole steroid program in order to kowtow to him. And now it's going to take him another 6 months to get in the ring. Why isn't he fighting in February on Super Bowl weekend?
yeah, I mean, do you think it's odd that he's not going to fight on the UFC 300 card? Don't you think that's where they would have wanted him?
Yeah, that's an option. That's an option. Like I said, Super Bowl weekend was another weekend that they had big time. Now they're going to wait till the June or July time period, another 6 months. Yeah, anything could happen. The guy could, crash his car and hurt himself, or have another legal problem pop up. And we'll see that fight. So we'll see when he gets in the ring. We'll see what happens, and then when he gets in the ring, we'll see what he's able to deliver. In terms of, he's been off for a long time. We're now going to be looking at McGregor over 35 in the ring, bulked up. Yeah, I'm not. This is the problem with the UFC, is that they're going to count on that to monetize big time. And once again, you're talking about a star whose shelf life is way past. He's way past due. He's way past due. They should have already had somebody new developed. And I'm not talking about Patty Pimblett. They're John Jones is another example of it. That we waited for years to see him, add the weight and go to heavyweight and this, that, the other stuff. Their reliance on the older stars is a little bit of a problem for him. And again, with McGregor, McGregor's got the FU money. At the end of the day, he's not going to be starving. He's not going to be doing anything. If another big business deal or something comes up for him, here's the thing to me is, I think that if they buy Top Rank, that the best option for McGregor is to box him again. I don't know if Canelo, or I don't know, which direction the opponent would be. It would have to be someone major. but I think that would be a better option than MMA, where, you know, if he slows down just a little bit, and he became a very good MMA fighter, and he was very precise with his hands for MMA. He tore Eddie up. But yeah, that stuff goes away after years of doing whatever it is he's doing and stuff like that. So yeah, I think that maybe by June they've bought Top Rank, and maybe we see him, and I think that if they wanted to monetize him, that they present him in some other way than MMA.
But I mean, as a matchmaker, you aren't going to get UFC 300 again. Does it surprise you that they weren't going to have him and Chandler on that card?
No, because UFC 100 was the big one. After that, they're all, what they did a big show in November for the November anniversary of, I believe last year was actually 30 years of UFC.
Yeah.
And things like that. They've already gotten to the point where, with 1,000 shows under their belt, that that 300 doesn't mean that much. It doesn't mean that much to me.
Yeah, I think that's interesting because, a lot of these newer fans online or people who have YouTube accounts, they're making a big deal out of this and saying, "Oh, they have to stack UFC 300." But people like and me, I mean, I guess I could see it, but like you're saying, they've already had, this many shows. UFC
They get,
300's not as big a deal as you think.
yeah. If they stack, what does stacking it mean? How will that compare to, you know, the bigger shows of the past, the top pay-per-view sales shows, which or how does that compare to McGregor Mayweather, or even Ngannou Fury? Just doing a pay-per-view event is no longer enough. That's the button that's been pushed there. So that's why I'm watching the Top Rank thing closely, because I think that we'll see how fast they're able to move if it happens. But I think with the WWE, there's the feeling of them biding their time. But again, like for example, with one, let's say one were to go ahead and do a show, in March in the United States, and they could stack a show. Like they would be able to bring over all their champions and all their grappling champions and all their Muay Thai guys, and do an elite show of all champions. And it would probably be an excellent display of martial arts for a standalone one show. And then, let's say they announce Atlanta as the venue, or whatever, New York City, whatever. In rolls Endeavor and just puts a WWE show on the same day. They don't even have to do MMA to mess with it. Now they could now they have the boxing component. They could put a boxing event on the same day in the same city. Even in the same city, it doesn't even matter anymore because of the distributions, right? So just they will be able to kill anybody with those shows. And I present to you that those will be the bigger events, will be that type of crossover, beyond MMA kind of thing, where, like I said, I'm waiting for, UFC 350, WrestleMania, and Tyson Fury's heavyweight title defense against Usyk all on the same weekend. That's what a company would be able to do if the Top Rank purchase goes through with Endeavor. And, Bob Mazy points to an email where Joe Silva told the Fertittas and the UFC executives, "We now own MMA." Think about what I just said: WWE, boxing, and MMA. We now own combat sports. Is that the new header of a? That's what they want, and that would make them really ultra powerful. And the PFL could close out their tournaments on thing. They can do whatever they want, and it's just so beneath what the game they're operating there on. So I think that's the company, stacking 300. It doesn't even interest Dana. Dana's not like, oh, well, we got 300 coming up. I'm worried about it. It's like, whatever, whoever's up, roll them out, put them on the card. The contracts have to be honored. Put him out there. He's not excited about making 300 the biggest show. That doesn't excite him. What's exciting to him is going on in the boardrooms and stuff like that because of the potential.
Yeah, I agree. A guy who's done that many shows, UFC shows, to do the 300th UFC show isn't interesting because he's done that
Yeah,
299 times already. What's
yeah,
interesting is the unknown.
yeah. No, and he's, and that's where you could just tell. You could just tell. By the way he talks about it with the top ranked thing and his denial. I think his denial said a lot because you know it wasn't as usual like crap on denial. Like he could have said anything. He could have said, F boxing. I've been there. I've tried. There's no helping those people. That sport's dead. But he didn't. He didn't. He just said, no, it's not really true. If it happens, at some point we're going to feel the power of that. With the WWE, we're still sort of waiting. Although we did see, Ronda and Shayna do some type of MMA kind of match in the WWE ring kind of thing. And I think that's where you'll see more of it. And I think John Jones may not be the right guy. Maybe he is. Maybe that he's kind of a heel. Maybe they could augment that with some script writing and stuff like that with the WWE and cross them over. It's not for everybody, but all they have to do is pick and choose and do a few things like that. At the end of the day, you may see Lesnar versus John Jones in a work. And they'll actually sort of market it in such a way that, your average person on the street may not think of it that way. And that's all they really care about is that star power and that attraction of money and the spectacle it would create would generate enough money that, it doesn't even matter that it's scripted. And I think that's one of the things that's being at least thought about. They have to be enticed by some of the possibilities that way. Again, it's dumb to think, you're going to take, the entire roster and be like, okay, now you're retired from MMA, go do pro wrestling. You know what I mean? Especially, but like, for example, in pro wrestling, if you look back at the history, there's now I think you got Paul Heyman who kind of manages Brock and does his talking because Brock's not great on the mic, and Heyman's fantastic. But the idea of a manager like the old Freddie Blassie, Captain Lou Albano, the Grand Wizard, even Slick and guys like that were that manager character's lost in pro wrestling. Now, wouldn't McGregor make a friggin' great manager? Because he's too small to really operate in pro wrestling.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? It's like, unless he's a talent like X-Pac or one of those guys like that, and he's probably too old to pick it up that way. So, but wouldn't he be a guy who could take a bump? That was the key to some of those guys. It's like, oh, the managers are out there raking havoc, and somebody gets a hold of them at one point and beats them up. And McGregor, that may be his next set of monetization would be the ultimate pro wrestling manager.
Yeah. Well, I think it's a good thing to end on for now, as far as the subject of Conor McGregor being a manager. But I want to give you a chance to talk about the rescue one last time before the new year. And
yeah, I'm actually getting ready to go out. I got a report about 3 hours ago. There's a dog in town with a broken leg that we're getting ready to go out and look for. Not sure. It's a little yellow dog with a broken leg that ran away. on a couple of the guys from the rescue and stuff. So we're gonna go, and that's how I'm gonna spend my New Year's. So we'll see what we can do. Hopefully, save a life.
And maybe, your thoughts as, we kind of started doing this stuff all this time. Maybe, I think it's our first New Year since we did this. Maybe give your thoughts from when we started to now.
Well, Todd, I've said it a couple times, and I'll say it again. I'm a fan of yours first. I love what you do because it's real, and I just, if it's not real and it's going to be something like that, I'd rather not even waste my time. So,
Right.
I don't think we have a lot of millions of viewers or anything like that, but I think that the people who do appreciate us appreciate that kind of old school touch where we're not going to pull punches and we're going to talk about um the sport the way we see it. And I think that your your tireless work is to be commended. Because I pop on here, we do a show a week or whatever, whatever it comes out, but you're a lot more prolific than just me. You've got a lot of other guests, a lot of other avenues that you're exploring. And yeah, I think to be honest with you, that you're actually probably the only journalist worth a crap in this sport. So I'm grateful to work with you, and I'm thankful that we do this show together, and that you give me an outlet. I get to spew my nonsense on here, but it's from the heart, and I do have a lot of experience and insight into this sport that we've gotten to watch grow into what it is, and that's been bittersweet. It's definitely good to see the guys, and that's on TV, and to walk down the street and see bozos wearing UFC hats here in Costa Rica. And I saw a girl with a UFC cutoff T-shirt the other day. I was like, man, we didn't picture that when we were in that war memorial in Indiana. You know what I mean? And so yeah, it's been good to see that. But yeah, it's become cookie cutter, and there's still a lot that could work on it. As one of the reasons I think that you excel is that even after you've put in a few years of doing this, something as elegant as getting John Peretti to come on and do an interview is historic. And again, nobody's going to give you or me or anybody credit for that. Just like Peretti doesn't get the credit he deserves.
Right.
But this is the only outlet where you're going to get that level of insight into the sport. Real people, and Peretti, I think he showed that he still has a good little bit of bitterness over it, because he should be at least called up and interviewed about shows. It's like, what do you think of this? What do you think of Ngannou's situation? Stuff like that. He didn't even pay attention because nobody's asked him to. It's sad. But you did, Todd, and so you're the man. You're the man. And hopefully 2024 we continue where we're leaving off, and maybe, become like a little snowball that gets bigger.
Yeah, I think there'll be more with Peretti. I think that's a good idea. Maybe we'll see if we can get him to pay attention to some things.
Yeah, he's older and set in his ways now, and he's probably used to not paying attention. So to have him dive in and be part of a show, I think is a little unreasonable. But I think that the guy still has a lot more to give. And we mentioned here earlier, one of his theories that would have been a game changer if he had been in charge of the sport. He would never be the richest guy in the sport. And Dana is the richest guy in the sport. So that would have been by choice, because he would have, and you know what? He's as rough and tough and tumble a personality as Dana is. That's actually a good match. If John had really had backers, we'd be in a different world. And so hopefully we get some backing so that your journalism gets to a different level as well.
All right. Well, I appreciate Miguel as always, and have a good New Year. Be safe on your rescue, and everyone who supports us, we appreciate it greatly. And until next year, see you again.
Take it easy, guys.